Okay, chapter 23, we're going to be moving into the Netherlands and then discussion on Spain. And if you recall, in the last video, I talked about how the Netherlands was actually governed by the Kingdom of Spain, Philip II of Spain in particular. So with that, in the Netherlands, we're going to see lots of we're going to see commissions from the Catholic Church during this time. And then that's going to lead up until about 1580, and then after that the Protestant Reformation is going to take hold, and we're going to see a big change. Okay, we're going to see a change. Now there's a particular artist I want to talk about during this time who has nothing to do with any of this. Really has nothing to do with the Reformation, doesn't have anything to do with the Counter-Reformation, and really just stands out alone for like 400 years. We won't see anything similar to this artist's work until the Surrealist time, and that is Bosch, figure 23.13. It's such an enigma, this painting. This is an altarpiece. It is a triptych, which means it has 3 panels. It's such an enigma because no one in art history can really definitely say why this was commissioned. It was designed and it lived in someone's home for like 7 years, and then it was taken down because it has such a high level of drama and distortion and extreme fantastical like environment to it. But it is biblically based. The more recent belief is that this was done for a wedding, and that the wedding was supposed to be present in the depictions of what is paradise. And I'll talk about that more specifically, like what is like what each panel is about here in just a minute. But it's so off the norm from everything that's going. It's not even unconventional. It's like beyond. And the proper term for something like this is futuristic. It's futuristic, meaning that Bosch was designing something that would not come to be until like 400 years down the road. So futuristic. So he's preparing a whole new wave of artwork that we're going to talk about in this class called Surrealism and Dadaism. Surrealism in particular. So like Salvador Dali. You can almost blink really quickly and look at one of these panels and then blink and look at Salvador Dali's Surrealist paintings and almost be like they blur in your mind, in your vision. So it really stands out. And this is called the Garden of Earthly Delights. And what it is, it's 2 panels, the one to the left and the one in the center, of paradise. And the one to the far left is Adam and Eve in paradise as things were meant to be, right, according to biblical narrative and orthodox beliefs. Then in the center is paradise that's developing to the point with all of the descendants of Adam and Eve, and things are getting worse and worse and worse. And this is like meant to be like the precursor to when there's the great flood, and then Noah and his family embark upon the what is it called? Indolation, I believe, like when it becomes completely consumed by water. Delusion, the great delusion of the earth. Dissolution, the great dissolution. And so this is leading up to that, all right? Then to the far right is hell, okay? So you got all kinds of merriment happening in the middle, all kinds of different sensual things that are occurring. You have a more austere gracefulness in the far left with Adam and Eve, and then you have complete hell to the far right. Everything's disjointed and dismembered. All right, being attacked by fantastical creatures, oddities left and right and center, if you will. But 2 things that are very Northern European about this: A, atmosphere, environment. This is called an aerial perspective. Okay, aerial perspective, an atmospheric perspective, which is creating more landscape, which is creating more environment, more atmosphere, which has to be, which is the second main thing about Northern Renaissance, horror vacui, fear of leaving any space unoccupied. So you can see that in all three panels. Everywhere is addressed. You have a softness in the sky in the paradise panels, the center and the left, but then you have it as kind of obscured and dark in the hellish panel to the far right. But most of it is completely covered. So horror vacui and atmospheric or aerial perspective is being used. All right. So again, there's a belief that this is a wedding scene, that it has to do with somebody's wedding. Not necessarily the case. And I have to just let you know, there is not one definite answer as to why Garden of Earthly Delights was commissioned or painted. Okay? But we're very thankful because it leads to the Surrealist movement, which is very much about subconscious psychology, with Dali and a whole bunch of others that we'll talk about. But what's really interesting is this is meant to be for a wedding between two. It's very different than the Northern European wedding scenes we've seen, like we saw with Jan van Eyck, with Giovanni and his wife. And that's a wedding communion between two, but it's far, far different. The symbolism is still there. There's symbolism in Van Eyck's painting, and there's symbolism here as well in a distorted way. So you do have that Northern European horror vacui, atmospheric perspective, as well as symbolism. Okay, that's very prevalent here in Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. So it does still fit into that Northern European kind of feel, but it has a totally different flair to it altogether. Just stand alone. Stand alone. Okay, I talked about the two paradise scenes, the one hell scene. There's also belief, because of some of the instruments throughout here that are very pharmaceutical based. Now, pharmaceutical at this time actually meant more like alchemy and magic, like people who are actually studying alchemy, witchcraft, magic, and such. So it's also believed that these different tools and instruments that are found in the different designs and the way that they relate to do different pharmaceutical alchemy-based instruments leads us to believe that this was geared towards a very, very, very specific type of people. All right, individuals that are very interested in elements of magic and chemical tools, like alchemy tools. Not meant to be in any church, and only really meant to be viewed by those specific types of that specific sect in particular that's interested in that type of study, metaphysical study, if you will. So pharmaceutical actually came from this metaphysical study of alchemy as well as magic. And so, kind of gives you a different interest or a different view on pharmaceuticals and drugs and such that come from pharmaceuticals. It started with these experimentations of different raw elements. That's where alchemy comes from. For example, they say a certain amount of bell metal combined with magnesium is supposed to promote or create 18 karat gold, the combination of them. I don't know anything about it, but that's just one example of what alchemy is. Okay, so that's Bosch. So let's talk about Bruegel the Elder, who's been termed as like the quiet Bosch. So he has a similar kind of orientation, huge horror vacui. Everything is filled with space. Everything is filling the space. Figure 2319, Netherlandish proverbs. So you can see it's like a more conventional or more controlled element of Bosch. Maybe something was going on at this time. Maybe pharmaceuticals were heavily used at this time, and who knows what were in those pharmaceuticals that were creating all these really wild-like scenes. But Bruegel the Elder was one of our first artists that we're going to see here in the Netherlands that is going to shift away from Catholic influences and into secular interest, day-to-day activities with everybody in society. For example, in the Netherlandish Proverbs, it's a secular human theme, so he's going to focus on human themes. At this point, remember, the Netherlands is also what was Flanders. Okay, so these artists, and Rembrandt is going to come from the Netherlands as well, coming from the Flemish Flanders area. So these artists are very much about the day-to-day activities, human secular activities from this point on. It's always really been in there, and it's been tied in and coupled with biblical Orthodox stories, but now it's becoming very much about the day-to-day grind of what everybody's doing. So human secular themes you need to associate with Bruegel the Elder. No Greek Roman elements here. None. Gone. Moving away. We're moving away from it now. Okay? We'll see a little bit during the Baroque, but we're really going to start to move away. Okay? In this Netherlandish Proverbs, we have the nobles, we have the peasants, and we have the clerics. So the Reformation clerics, okay? Not the priests, but the clerics that are all in the same scene. Part of all of these different proverbs. Okay? So no one is separate from anyone else. They're all in it together. Okay? So that is what is very secularly human about this new type of composition. Again, we see that Northern European interest in three main things. The atmospheric perspective with lots of nature involved. We see the hora vacui completely consumed with activity. No space is really left unturned. And then symbolism, and where the symbolism is with the Proverbs. And the Proverbs, there's more than 100 Proverbs in this that are biblically based. And they come in regards to human folly. Like the activities of how humans have follied and fallen, to try to learn from these unfortunate circumstances to better understand intellectually what to do in the future. So lots of psychology involved. So Proverbs. And one for example is way back in the top right corner. It's on the cliffside underneath the sun, and it's the blind leading the blind. So that's a proverb. And then the very bottom left is an individual eating a pillar in the blue. And that's a proverb of, making such great attempt, being zealous, being a zealite, and trying, way too hard for the attention of others. And then on top of the roof, you see an archer with a crossbow shooting but not hitting anything, all the targets, totally missing them. So a proverb of not being attentive. And so there's so many proverbs throughout this that are very symbolic to biblical tales. All right? So that is very prevalent. Again, I talked about the atmospheric, or also known as aerial perspective, to give more nature, to show more nature, and to show more opportunities for that hora vacui. Okay, so intentionally creating a certain theme or a certain type of dimension in this atmospheric perspective to show more nature, to show more activities amongst everyday people, and also to show more opportunities on filling the space. So that is Netherlandish Proverbs, and let's look at one more, and that is figure 2320, Hunters in the Snow. Hunters in the Snow. Again, we see atmospheric perspective, okay? We see completely covered composition of activity. Quiet in that it's a winter aspect, but still very active all the way from the foreground in the front to the far left where the trees are and the dogs, all the way receding back to the right in the atmosphere of the mountainous landscape on the horizon. Okay. Now this is what Bruegel the Elder was doing at this time, is he was actually showing he did a series of 6 different paintings that show 2 different months. So that's very secular, to show actually what's going on at this time in the Netherlands during these specific months. I think this was 1565, yeah, 1565, which was a very, very hard winter in Northern European countries at this time. And it depicts December and January, which again is a very secular human thing. So instead of the title being about something that's biblical or religious in nature, this is about what everyday people are dealing with. It's secular. Okay. It also went to a private collector. It did not go into a church. It did not go into any religious setting. It went into someone's own private home. All right, which is really, really important, because we're going to start to see that now. Is as we get out of the Baroque and into the Enlightenment, a lot of the art is going to go into institutions of education, institutions of higher higher interest, and then also individual folks that are part of these intellectual institutions to raise levels of consciousness and awareness and cognitive study. All right. One last thing about this is it is optically accurate with the aerial perspective, with the grounds moving from the left to the right. And I kind of talked about that. So you have, with the dogs and the trees at the far left, it is a perfect aerial perspective on that study of optics that we talked about, that Leonardo da Vinci began its studying, and then it's moved all the way up here with Bruegel the Elder in Northern European, where you see a shift from the foreground, which is where the dogs and the trees are, to the middle ground, which is where the ice skaters are down there in the center right, and then all the way back to the background, which is the peaks of the mountains in the very far right before it gets to the sky. Okay? So it is optically accurate with this aerial or atmospheric perspective, leading from the nature of the far left to the nature of the far right. That diagonal. It's a diagonal axis, okay? It's not straight on to the very back. It all moves to the right at this diagonal axis. Okay. So, that's the Netherlands. Who was ran by King Philip II of Spain. And I have there's a whole bunch of, Spanish painters at this time, but there's one in particular who's not Spanish at all that resided in Spain that we're going to focus on in particular, and that's El Greco, figure 23.27. Now, what's happening in Spain is, and we're going to get way more into Spain when we get into the Baroque, because they're pretty much going to be the main drivers of art during the Baroque time. So they ran the colonies in the New World. Okay, so all the colonies on the east, from the Caribbean islands, which they were calling the West Indies, all the way up to Florida, and a little bit further up. They were essentially, from Brazil to Panama to the Caribbean islands, all the way up into, Florida and such in the United States. All of that was all the Spanish, and they really got a lot of wealth from their explorations, with the Columbus, Magellan, and all these different Spanish explorers, and that's what made them a huge and wealthy and dominant powerhouse at this time with Spain. And it's going to move into this golden age with the introduction of El Greco, and Spain is going to move into this golden age of prosperity with wealth and dominance, with the most powerful military, oceanic military at that. And with that came the spread of Catholicism and a fight against the Protestants. So that's what's happening. That's what the Spanish are doing, is they are everywhere in the world right now, western part of the world in particular, Western Hemisphere. and the Catholicism is going along with them. Okay, so Philip II is huge in all of his um, successors were very much in support of Catholicism and fighting against the Reformation. So they were a big part of the Counter-Reformation and fighting against the Protestant reformers. So that's going to happen. That's what's the context of Spain at this time. And we're going to talk about Spain even more here in the next chapter. But with all that, they housed, if you will, a Greek painter by the name of El Greco. Okay, he was Greek from the island of Crete. So you can only imagine, I mean, there's not a lot of Greco-Roman influence coming from El Greco, even though he's from the Greek island of Crete when he moved to Toledo, Spain. And so what happened is, which is very interesting, that there's all this interest in antiquity and this Greco-Roman influence and the rebirth of it, but El Greco himself is not interested in that. And he is more interested in kind of the hidden elements of the artistic world. And I'll talk about it here in just in a second. So he's Greek. He studied Byzantine art in particular, the Byzantine painters. And the Byzantine painters were icon painters that came called iconophiles that came out of the move of the Roman Empire into monotheism, or the belief of one God versus multiple gods, under Constantine. So Constantine was the first Roman emperor that emphasized believing in one God and not multiple gods. And from there came late antiquity, which brought upon a very non-dimensional and more spiritual direction on painting and establishing artwork about God and Jesus. So there was an embrace of Jesus during this late antiquity, which moves into the Byzantine period. Because Constantine, who was originally in Rome, moved Roman Empire activities to Constantinople, named after him, was called Istanbul, Turkey. Constantinople. And from there, Roman activities were governed. That became the new Rome. And that is the Byzantinum area. Eastern Roman Empire is the Byzantinum area. And it's all about emphasis on Christianity and emphasis on Jesus. He moved it to that area to get closer to Jerusalem, which we know Bethlehem and Jerusalem are a big part of Jesus' life. And so Byzantinum is derivative of that. And that's in Art History 141. But it's very much about the emotional and the effulgent glow of God and of Jesus. And it's very flat. It has no dimension to it. So he's studying that. And then he also studied under Titian, that we talked about literally in his studio. Okay, and Titian was slightly a Mannerist, but a colorist more than anything, which led El Greco interested in the mannerisms of southern Italy, the southern Italian Renaissance, and the mannerism, the elongations, the distortions, the unconventional aspects of painting during the Renaissance time. So when you look at El Greco, know that he's a combination of those interests in those Byzantine religious illuminated glow of light that was part of the Byzantine iconophile painters, as well as the Manneristic painters of the Renaissance. So he's essentially not throwing any of the Greco-Roman interest in it at all, even though he's Greek. All right, he's very interested in Eastern Roman art, or Eastern Byzantinum art, and as well as the Mannerists of the Renaissance painters in Italy. He ended up in Toledo, Spain, like I already talked about. And in Spain, he made and he painted paintings like Burial of Count Orgaz, 23.27. And what he was interested in is emotional work brought on by that Mannerism and that Byzantine style. So they both are very much emphasized on emotions to connect you with the biblical stories. It was about emotions, not about rationality or mathematics or naturalism. It was about emotionalism. And the reason he focused on the emotionalism with Mannerism in the Byzantine art is what made the Spanish love his work and asked him to commission on behalf of the Spanish Catholic churches. So because of his love for the emotions behind the Byzantinum and the Mannerisms, the Spanish Catholic churches wanted him to work for them. That's why he resided in Toledo, Spain. And figure 23.27, Burial of Count Orgaz, is an example of that. It was for the Catholic Church. It was designed for Santo Tomé in Toledo, for the Catholic Church. And he's developing new techniques that are going to become very prominent in these future painters. From El Greco is going to be the staple to a lot of painters that we're going to see in the future. Not so much Spanish, but other painters in the future. And this is why. Let me check time. Yeah, okay. He learns how to distinguish the terra, or the earthly realm, down low in the painting, and that of the celestial realm, which is up above. Okay, so he's learned how to not only separate the two, but also unify them. I'll talk about the unification here in a minute. With the lower terra, like the earthly realm, everything is very driven forward like a horizontal line. Even though we don't see a horizontal line in the background or a vanishing point, everything is very direct and facing like towards the eyes, right? Like you're peering right into it, like you're standing there and you're looking into the scene. The celestial or the spiritual realm up above, or the heavenly realm, is at a diagonal, moving up at a diagonal towards Jesus's character, Jesus's portrayal, okay, in the center top. So the celestial is angular or diagonal, and then the terra, or the earthly realm, is forward, okay, going straight. So that's how he divides it: a straight line into the earthly realm, and then a diagonal line into the spiritual realm. And also he unifies it by the light above is illuminating the earthly realm below. Okay, so the glow of activity that's happening on all of the different clothing, the highlights on the faces, the figures that have descended down from the celestial realm into the earthly realm to put Count Orgaz into the grounds. They all have a light glow on them. Everybody has a light that's emitting and illuminating off of them based off of their connection to the celestial realm. So everyone present here has a direct connection to the celestial realm to some degree, or they wouldn't be in the painting. He even has King Philip II up in the celestial realm. That's how connected he is to the Spanish kingdom. Right? King Philip, remember, is the head of Spain, the head of the Netherlands, pretty much got everything going in regards to the Spanish conquest of dominance and wealth. He has him painted up in the celestial realm. So, of course, he was very much loved by the Spanish court. The Manneristic style are the long limbs and the drapery that's whirling around. You know, the drapery looks like it's caught in the wind. The appendages are elongated and abstracted. Even the cloud itself is whirling like fabric. Okay, so that's a very Manneristic style. That's where the Mannerism comes from. All All right. The Byzantinum is the solemn-like emotional expressions of all the different figures. So that's the coupling between the Mannerism and the Byzantine. The upper, wait, yeah. The upper and lower are linked by two different things. We have three, sorry. We have the light, we talked about the light, and how the glow or the effulgence of the figures down in the earth are reflecting the light source coming from Jesus up above in the celestial realm. Two other things. One is the winged angel that's carrying the soul of Count Orgaz up into the heavens, in the center, right in the middle. The way his body angles is cutting down into the earthly realm, which is unifying that center section. And then also the gazes of the faces of the figures in the earthly realm looking up into the celestial realm. That creates an implied directional force up. All right? And what that's doing is it's unifying the whole composition in the top and the bottom. In the past, there was a huge disconnect between that of the celestial and that of the earthly. But here, El Greco is one of the first to really unify the two. Okay? And what that yields all the emotions involved. And how that emotional stance of unifying the earthly realm of the solemn placement of the faces and that of the more high energy solemn, less somber, less solemn, more jovial and more ecstatic, and this ecstasy that's present in the celestial realm, connecting those two types of emotions of ecstasy in the spiritual realm and solemn somberness in the material realm, is connecting the emotions, which is something that the Catholic Church wanted as part of their counter-reformation. So with that religious fervor of the Catholic Church going against the Reformed Protestants, this work by El Greco, this is just one example, is unifying that emotional, socio-political, and religious attempt on behalf of the Catholic Church. That's why he was loved and asked to do so many paintings on behalf of the Spanish court. Okay, that's chapter 23. We'll get into 24 here in just a while.